the young and the restless spoilers as the crimson dusk fell over the grand estate nestled in the hills above Genoa City. A strange quietness began to seep through the elaborate hedges and marble pathways that lined the outer grounds of the Dumas villa. The scent of imported lilies hung heavy in the warm air, mingling with the tension that clung to every guest attending Aristotle Dumas's elusive and opulent gathering. No one truly knew why they had been summoned, only that an invitation from Dumas was not something one declined. The anticipation had built for weeks, aided by whispers in back offices and elegant salons that this party would mark a turning point in the fabric of Genoa's elite. Some believed it would be the beginning of a new era in business and influence, others suspected darker motives beneath the surface. And in the shadows of that uncertainty, fate prepared to strike in the most unexpected way. Damian stood near the back veranda, his champagne flute untouched as he scanned the glistening interior through towering glass doors. There was a strange detachment in his eyes, as if he knew something others didn't, as if he was trying to memorize the moment before it vanished. Having only recently re-entered Amy's life after decades of separation, Damian carried with him a complex blend of regret, hope, and latent distrust. The reunion had not been simple. It never could have been. Yet tonight was meant to be a new beginning, or at least that's what Amy had dared to believe when she agreed to attend. She had hoped the air of celebration might disguise the underlying fractures in their bond. But as the orchestra swelled and laughter rose like perfume into the high ceilings of the ballroom, Amy felt a weight in her chest that no dress or diamonds could mask. It wasn't just maternal anxiety, it was fear. A fear that something in the air was poisoned, not just by envy or rivalry, but by a truth yet uncovered. The moment arrived in silence. No dramatic gasp, no clattering of glasses, no wailing violin string to signal tragedy. 1 minute Damian was standing by the marble staircase, exchanging polite nods with a young financier, and the next he was on the floor, his body twisted unnaturally, his glass shattering in slow motion against the inlaid tile. For a few seconds, confusion reigned. No one screamed. No one ran. But then came the unmistakable sound of Amy's voice slicing through the stunned crowd like a blade, raw, broken, accusing. She collapsed beside him, shaking, her cries echoing through the vaulted hall as the music faltered and the illusion of glamour shattered completely. Damian was dead, and the story of the evening would never be about power, wealth, or charm again. It would be about a body, a secret, and a woman who refused to stay silent. At first, the narrative was simple. A weak heart. A delayed diagnosis. Perhaps too much wine and not enough rest. But Amy knew better. She had spent decades reading between the lines, parsing smiles into threats and silences into confessions. This wasn't a tragedy of health, it was a murder dressed as misfortune. And though many dismissed her grief-fueled claims as desperation, there was something in her voice that no one could deny. It carried conviction. Purpose. Rage. The next morning, the tabloids spun the event with predictable chaos. Tragedy at the Dumas Gala. Socialite dies in mysterious collapse. Was it poison? Sources say yes. Reporters crowded the gates of Amy's estate, hurling questions she ignored with impassive disdain. She had no intention of feeding the media machine. Her fight was with a single man, Aristotle Dumas. And she would destroy him from within. Because Amy, unlike the others, had never been fooled by his charisma or seduced by his reputation. She had seen something long ago, something she had buried until now. Damian's death had unearthed it. And with it, her silence was over. The truth, as it often is, was messier than legend. Aristotle Dumas wasn't just a wealthy investor with an appetite for attention. He was a manipulator of history, a man whose wealth had been stitched together not through genius, but through betrayal, blackmail, and blood. Amy had met him under a different name, in a different country, decades ago. Back then, he had been young, hungry, and dangerous, traits he had learned to disguise over time. And he had done something then that Amy had never forgiven. Something that connected him, indirectly and tragically, to the man she had only just begun to call her son again. What Dumas didn't know, or hadn't realized, was that Damian was his undoing. Though they had never met, Damian's presence at the party had triggered something, some whisper of a thread in Amy's mind that warned her the past was bleeding into the present. She hadn't wanted to believe it. But when she saw Dumas flinch as he noticed Damian across the room, just a flicker, a hesitation, her instincts screamed. She had tried to keep Damian close that night, tried to warn him without words. But she hadn't acted fast enough. And now he was gone. In the days that followed, Amy did not grieve like others. She didn't disappear behind drawn curtains or reject visitors with tearful apologies. She moved deliberately, silently, as though she were assembling a puzzle only she could see. She reviewed surveillance footage from the gala, memorized timelines, matched witness accounts. She compiled the history of every employee who had access to drinks that evening, interviewed staff at the caterer's firm, traced the source of the imported garnishes. And in the shadows of her investigation, a pattern emerged, one that pointed not just to opportunity, but to motive. Someone wanted Damian gone. And someone close to Dumas had ensured that it happened. The revelation came not from a confession or a slip of the tongue, but from a handwritten note Damian had left in her coat pocket. It had been folded carefully, the ink slightly smudged, as if written in haste. If anything happens to me tonight, he's the reason. Ask about the September files. Those 6 words changed everything. Because Amy knew what the September files were. Or at least, she knew the myth. A dossier of correspondence, photographs, bank transfers, and testimonies that tied Dumas to a series of offshore investments designed to dismantle rival corporations by orchestrating their downfalls from within. Damian had discovered them during his brief tenure working in logistics for a company that had been absorbed by Dumas's firm 3 years prior. He hadn't known the full extent. But he had found enough to spark questions. And that, Amy now realized, had marked him for death. She went public not with fury, but with precision. A carefully arranged press conference. A series of leaked documents. A private letter to the district attorney's office. And with each move, the mask that Dumas had so meticulously crafted began to crack. Shareholders pulled out. Business partners demanded audits. Former employees crawled out of silence with stories they had buried out of fear. And through it all, Amy stood unwavering, her grief transformed into justice, her silence reborn as thunder. Dumas, for all his power and wealth, could not stop the hemorrhaging of his empire. He denied the accusations at first, calling them the delusions of a woman unhinged by grief. But denial turned to desperation when the September files were published in full, confirming years of manipulation, illegal lobbying, and quiet corporate sabotage. His world collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. But Amy's war was never just about revenge. It was about legacy. She had lost her son. She would not lose the truth. In the final weeks before Dumas was formally indicted, she took control of the narrative in Genoa City, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Her presence at boardrooms and charities shifted from background to spotlight. And as she spoke about corruption, about motherhood, about the high cost of pretending not to see, people listened. The death of Damian was not a subplot or a tool for drama. It was a turning point. It revealed the rot that had festered beneath elegance and money. It exposed the myth of invincibility that men like Aristotle Dumas wore like armor. And most importantly, it reignited the spirit of a woman who had once buried her past in fear, only to rise, like fire, in the face of loss. In the end, Dumas was not destroyed by courts or competitors. He was destroyed by truth, wielded with grief-sharpened resolve by a mother who refused to stay quiet. Genoa City would remember that party not for its grandeur, but for the ghost it created, and the reckoning it unleashed. And though Damian was gone, his name would not vanish into the silence of unspoken tragedies. It would echo, forever, as the moment the powerful learned that even the shadows have witnesses, and even the forgotten have voices. The death of Damian was supposed to be silent thunder, a calculated message embedded in tragedy, a warning dressed as mourning, meant to paralyze fear without igniting rebellion. But Dumas had miscalculated. In choosing a man he thought dispensable, he had unknowingly struck at the rawest nerve of the one person in Genoa City who had nothing left to lose and everything left to expose. Damian wasn't merely collateral. He was Amy's son. Her blood, her redemption, her second chance at the life that had once been torn from her. And now he was a body beneath earth and marble, while Dumas sipped from his crystal glass, believing the game had tilted in his favor. What he failed to see was that the rules no longer applied. Amy would not be swayed by power, wealth, or pretense. What Dumas had done was not just kill a man. He had opened a vault that was never meant to be unsealed, and within it lay not just secrets, but reckoning. For days, Amy vanished from public view. The tabloids speculated about her breakdown, her silence, her potential disappearance. But what no one realized was that she wasn't retreating, she was preparing. In a secluded cabin once owned by her grandmother outside the city limits, Amy assembled everything. Not just Damian's note or the September files, but every ledger, photograph, letter, and recording that had ever brushed against the name Aristotle Dumas. It was all there, hidden away, obscured from memory until now. Because Amy had known long before Damian's death that Dumas was dangerous. She had lived that truth, decades ago, under a different name, in a different life. She had trusted him once. She had paid for that mistake. But now, the payment was no longer hers alone. And she would make sure Dumas paid in full. Amy's return to Genoa was not subtle. She stepped into the lobby of Dumas Global Enterprises wearing black from neck to heel. Not mourning attire, but armor. Her eyes were not clouded by tears, they burned with clarity. Employees froze. Assistants reached for security. But no one dared stop her. She walked past the receptionist desk, past the boardroom, and straight into Dumas's private office. He was there, of course. Expecting someone else. Expecting a journalist, perhaps, or another investor fleeing the hemorrhaging company. What he wasn't expecting was Amy, alive with fury, radiant with pain, and unafraid. He said her name with that signature calm, the one that had once deceived entire rooms. But Amy didn't answer. She placed a small, black folder on his desk. "This," she said, "is everything you buried. And now I will burn it into the sky." Dumas laughed. Not out of joy, but out of disbelief. He still believed he could control the outcome. "No one will believe you," he said. "You're a grieving mother. Unstable. Hysterical. Do you know how many women I've outlasted?" But Amy didn't flinch. "Then let's make it one less," she replied. And then she walked away, not because she was finished, but because the war had just begun. The folder was a warning shot. The real ammunition was still to come. She called a press conference for the following evening, on the steps of the old Genoa courthouse, symbolic, haunting, precise. Reporters, skeptical at first, gathered in droves when they learned the subject. And when Amy spoke, the city held its breath. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She told a story. A story of a man who wore different names like coats, who moved from city to city leaving ruins that looked like accidents, who stole not just money but identities, who orchestrated collapses that looked like market fluctuations. She told them about Paris in 1986, about a girl who trusted a man with a plan, about a betrayal so complete it forced her into hiding. She told them about the return of her son, the brief time they had, the truth he uncovered, the moment he died. And when she was done, she didn't ask for sympathy. She asked for consequence. "This is not about my pain," she said. "This is about your silence. If you stay quiet now, you become the accomplice. And I will not let you hide behind fear while men like him write the ending." Then she walked away as flashbulbs burst behind her, her silhouette carved against the marble pillars like a judgment rendered. The next days unraveled everything. Dumas's empire fractured, his investors sued, his allies evaporated. He called in favors that were no longer owed. He tried to bribe, to threaten, to intimidate. But Amy had moved beyond reach. She had weaponized truth, and no amount of money could unwrite what had been said. More victims emerged, some emboldened by her courage, others shamed into revelation. The picture that formed was damning, a trail of devastation meticulously plotted, masked by charm and diplomacy. And at the center, always, was the man who now found himself alone in a fortress of glass, watching it crack with every headline. But even as justice took its course, Amy knew it wasn't over. Dumas had always planned for legal collapse. He would take a plea, hide his assets, disappear under a new identity. That's what he did. That's who he was. And so, Amy played her final card. In a private interview aired at prime time, she unveiled the part of the story no one had yet heard. That Damian was Dumas's biological son. Conceived during a time when Amy had been manipulated, discarded, and forced into exile. She had never told Damian. She had barely accepted it herself. But now, the world would know. He killed his own son, she said, her voice trembling not from grief, but from fury. And he didn't even know it. Because to him, people are not people. They're tools. Collateral. Names on documents. He didn't see the boy in front of him. He saw a threat. The revelation was nuclear. Public sentiment turned from shock to horror. Investors didn't just abandon Dumas, they denounced him. His assets were frozen. His name became toxic. And for once, the predator found himself hunted by the very machine he had once controlled. Amy, meanwhile, withdrew from the spotlight, not because she had nothing more to say, but because she had said enough. She had not sought revenge. She had demanded truth. And in doing so, she had rewritten the narrative from victimhood to resistance. In the months that followed, Genoa City changed. Not in dramatic ways, but in subtle, enduring ones. Boards began questioning their ethics. Journalists pursued stories with more tenacity. Women came forward with stories they had buried for decades. And Damian's name was whispered not as a footnote, but as a turning point. His death was no longer just a headline, it was a reckoning. Amy never forgave Dumas. Forgiveness was never the goal. But she refused to be defined by what he took. Instead, she defined herself by what she reclaimed. And when the city finally built a small memorial in Damian's honor, hidden in the public gardens near the courthouse, Amy visited it not to mourn, but to remember. She placed no flowers. Only a single sheet of paper, weighted by a stone. It read, "He thought killing you would stop me. He only woke me up." And so the war between Amy and Aristotle Dumas became a parable. A story passed through boardrooms, classrooms, and newsrooms. A story about silence, about what happens when it is broken, and about the cost of mistaking grief for weakness. Dumas had chosen someone to die, thinking it would silence the rest. But he chose wrong. And in doing so, he lost everything. If you'd like, I can continue this storyline even further. Perhaps with Dumas planning an escape, Amy facing betrayal from an ally, or Genoa City's legal system unraveling under the weight of hidden deals. Just let me know how you'd like to evolve the arc next.